Mother bear, carried sick. Baby to emergency room. What doctors did next. Put everyone in tears. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Mercy General Hospital as Dr. Ethan Marshall finished his third cup of coffee that evening. The emergency room had been unusually quiet for a Tuesday night, with only a few minor cases trickling in throughout his 12-hour shift. He rubbed his tired eyes and glanced at the clock above the nurse's station. 2 more hours until he could finally head home to his small apartment and collapse into bed. Jessica Brooks, the head nurse on duty, was organizing patient charts when the automatic doors suddenly burst open with such force that they seemed to shudder on their hinges. What happened next would forever change everyone present in that sterile, fluorescent-lit space. A massive, brown bear, easily weighing over 400 pounds, stood in the doorway of the emergency room. Her thick fur was matted with rain and mud, and her dark eyes held an expression that seemed almost human in its desperation and determination. But what truly stopped every heart in that room was what she carried so carefully in her massive jaws. Cradled between her powerful teeth, as gently as any mother would hold her child, was a small bear cub. The little one hung limp and motionless, its tiny chest barely rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. The mother bear's eyes swept across the room, taking in the shocked faces of doctors, nurses, and patients who had frozen in place like statues. For a moment that stretched into eternity, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sounds were the steady beep of heart monitors from nearby rooms and the soft patter of rain against glass. Dr. Marshall felt his medical training warring with his basic human instinct to run. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, that wild bears simply didn't walk into hospitals carrying their sick young. Yet here she stood, this magnificent creature, her entire posture radiating a mother's desperate plea for help. The bear took a careful step forward, her massive paws making surprisingly little sound on the polished linoleum floor. She moved with deliberate slowness, as if she understood that her presence was causing fear and wanted to show that she meant no harm. Her eyes never left Dr. Marshall's face, and in that moment he realized something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. This wasn't just instinct driving her actions, this was conscious choice. This was a mother who had somehow understood that humans could help her baby when she could not. Jessica was the first to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ethan, what do we do?" Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone, unsure whether to call security, animal control, or simply pray that this was all some kind of elaborate hallucination brought on by too many double shifts. Dr. Marshall raised his hand slowly, signaling for everyone to remain calm. His years of emergency medicine had taught him to think clearly under pressure, but nothing had prepared him for this. The bear watched his every movement, her intelligent eyes tracking his gestures with an awareness that sent chills down his spine. She seemed to be evaluating him, deciding whether he could be trusted with her most precious possession. "Nobody move suddenly," he said in a voice that was steadier than he felt. "She's not here to hurt anyone. Look at how she's holding her cub. She's being incredibly gentle." As he spoke, he noticed the way the mother bear's massive head tilted slightly, as if she were listening to his words and finding some comfort in his calm tone. The cub in her mouth was clearly in distress. "Even from across the room, Doctor." Marshall could see that the little one was dehydrated and running a fever. Its fur was dull and lifeless, and its breathing was far too rapid and shallow. Whatever was wrong with the baby bear, it was serious enough to drive a wild animal to seek help from the very species most bears would avoid at all costs. "Slowly, carefully, Doctor." Marshall took a step toward the bear. She watched him approach, her body tense but not aggressive. When he was about 10 feet away, she did something that made everyone in the room gasp in amazement. She gently lowered her head and placed her cub on the floor, then took several steps backward. The message was unmistakable. She was entrusting her baby to his care. The cub lay motionless on the cold floor, its tiny chest rising and falling in irregular patterns that made Dr. Marshall's heart ache with recognition. He had seen that same labored breathing in human children countless times, and he knew they didn't have much time. Whatever had brought this mother bear to their door, her instincts had been right. Her baby was dying, and she had somehow known that this place, with its bright lights and antiseptic smells, was where miracles happened. "Jessica, I need you to slowly get me a pediatric examination kit, Doctor," Marshall said, never taking his eyes off the mother bear. "And call Dr. Sarah Chen from Pediatrics. Tell her we have a very unusual patient, but don't mention what kind over the phone. We don't need half the hospital rushing down here right now." The bear seemed to understand that he was trying to help. She settled down on her haunches about 15 feet away, close enough to watch every move he made, but far enough to give him space to work. Her eyes never left her cub, and the soft whimpering sounds she made were heartbreakingly similar to those of any worried mother. As Dr. Marshall knelt beside the tiny patient, he was struck by how small and fragile the cub looked without its mother's protective presence. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, still dependent on its mother for everything. Its fur was soft and downy, designed for warmth and comfort rather than the harsh realities of wilderness survival. Whatever illness had struck this little one, it had done so at the most vulnerable time of its young life. The examination revealed what Dr. Marshall had suspected. The cub was severely dehydrated and running a dangerous fever. Its gums were pale, indicating possible anemia or blood loss, and there were signs of respiratory distress that suggested pneumonia or another serious lung infection. In human terms, this would be a critical case requiring immediate intervention. But as he worked, something extraordinary began to happen. Other staff members, initially frozen by fear and shock, started to move with purpose. Jessica returned with the examination equipment, her initial terror replaced by the same professional focus that had made her one of the best nurses in the hospital. Dr. Chen arrived and, after a moment of stunned silence, immediately began assisting with the assessment. The mother bear watched every movement with intense concentration. When Dr. Marshall gently lifted her cub to check its breathing, she made a soft huffing sound that seemed almost like encouragement. When he used his stethoscope to listen to the tiny heart, she leaned forward slightly as if trying to hear what he was hearing. Her behavior was so remarkably human-like that it began to transform the fear in the room into something else entirely. "I've never seen anything like this, Doctor," Chen whispered as she helped prepare an IV line small enough for their unusual patient. "It's like she knows we're trying to help. She's not showing any signs of aggression at all." Word began to spread through the hospital, despite efforts to keep the situation contained. Patients in nearby rooms had heard the commotion and were peering out of their doorways. Other staff members found excuses to walk past the emergency room, hoping to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary scene unfolding there. But remarkably, the presence of so many people didn't seem to distress the mother bear. If anything, she appeared to draw comfort from the obvious concern and care being shown to her baby. As the medical team worked to stabilize the cub, something beautiful began to emerge from what had started as a moment of pure terror. The artificial boundaries between human and animal seemed to dissolve in the face of universal maternal love. Here was a mother who had risked everything to save her child, and here were humans responding with the same instinctive compassion they would show to any suffering creature. The cub began to respond to treatment almost immediately. The IV fluids helped restore some color to its gums, and antibiotics started to ease the respiratory distress. As its condition improved, it began to make small mewing sounds that caused its mother to shift forward anxiously, clearly wanting to comfort her baby, but understanding that she needed to let the humans work. Dr. Marshall found himself talking to the mother bear as he worked, explaining what he was doing in the same gentle voice he used with worried parents. "We're giving her fluids to help with the dehydration," he said, surprised by how natural it felt to include her in the process. "The antibiotics should help fight whatever infection is making her sick." "She's going to be okay." The bear's response was immediate and unmistakable. Her entire body seemed to relax slightly, and she made a series of soft vocalizations that sounded remarkably like gratitude. It was impossible to deny that she understood, at least on some level, that her desperate gamble had paid off. Her baby was going to survive. As the hours passed, the emergency room transformed into something that defied all conventional understanding of the relationship between humans and wildlife. The mother bear remained patient and calm, never once showing aggression despite being surrounded by strangers in an unfamiliar environment. She seemed to sense that everyone present was working toward the same goal she had risked everything to achieve: saving her cub's life. Patients who had initially been terrified found themselves drawn into the unfolding drama. An elderly man recovering from a heart attack asked to be wheeled closer so he could watch the proceedings. A young mother with her own sick child began crying as she witnessed the bear's obvious distress and love. The artificial walls that usually separated people in a hospital setting began to crumble as everyone present became part of something larger than themselves. The transformation wasn't limited to the humans in the room. As her cub's condition continued to improve, the mother bear began to show signs of the exhaustion and stress she had been hiding. Her massive frame seemed to shrink slightly as the adrenaline that had driven her desperate journey finally began to fade. She had been running on pure maternal instinct for who knows how long, and now that her baby was safe, her own needs were finally making themselves known. Jessica noticed it first. "Look at her," she whispered to Dr. Marshall. "She's shaking. When was the last time she ate or slept? She's been so focused on her cub that she's forgotten to take care of herself." It was true. The bear's thick fur couldn't hide the fact that she was underweight, probably from spending all her time caring for her sick baby instead of foraging for food. Her eyes, while still alert and focused on her cub, showed the telltale signs of exhaustion that any parent would recognize. She had pushed herself to the absolute limit to get her baby the help it needed. Dr. Marshall made a decision that went against every protocol in the book, but felt absolutely right in his heart. "Jessica, see if the cafeteria has any fruit or vegetables we could offer her, and maybe some water. She's been taking care of her baby for so long that she's forgotten to take care of herself." The request sparked a chain reaction of compassion that spread throughout the hospital like wildfire. Within minutes, staff members were arriving with offerings: apples from their lunch bags, bottled water, even honey packets from the cafeteria. Nobody questioned the wisdom of feeding a wild bear in the emergency room. In that moment, she wasn't a dangerous wild animal. She was simply a mother who had sacrificed everything for her child. The bear accepted the offerings with a dignity that was almost regal. She ate slowly and carefully, never taking her eyes off her cub for more than a few seconds. Each bite seemed to restore not just her physical strength but her confidence that everything was going to be okay. The humans around her weren't just healing her baby, they were caring for her too. As dawn began to break outside the hospital windows, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, the cub opened its eyes for the first time since arriving. The tiny creature looked around with the confused curiosity of any young animal waking up in a strange place. But when its gaze found its mother, it made a small sound of recognition and comfort. The mother bear's response was immediate and overwhelming. She rose to her feet and moved closer, making soft vocalizations that were clearly meant to reassure and comfort her baby. The cub tried to lift its head toward the familiar sound, and in that moment, everyone present witnessed something that would stay with them forever. The pure, unfiltered joy of a mother reunited with her recovering child. Dr. Marshall felt tears stinging his eyes as he watched the interaction. In all his years of medicine, he had seen countless reunions between patients and their families, but this was different. This was raw and primal and beautiful in a way that transcended species. This was love in its most essential form, stripped of all pretense and social convention. The improvement in both mother and cub was remarkable to witness. As the little one grew stronger and more alert, its mother seemed to regain her own vitality. The exhaustion and stress that had marked her features began to fade, replaced by something that could only be described as hope. She had taken an impossible risk and won. Her baby was going to live. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was taking place in the humans who had witnessed this extraordinary event. Doctors and nurses who dealt with life and death every day found themselves seeing their work through new eyes. Patients who had been focused on their own problems discovered a renewed appreciation for the simple miracle of being alive. The artificial barriers that usually separated people in a hospital setting had completely dissolved in the face of something far more powerful than fear or prejudice. As the morning shift began to arrive, word of the night's events spread throughout the hospital with lightning speed. But rather than the chaos and disruption that might have been expected, something beautiful began to emerge. People came not as gawkers or curiosity seekers, but as witnesses to something sacred. They understood, without being told, that they were in the presence of something that transcended the ordinary boundaries of their daily lives. The mother bear seemed to sense the change in energy as more people arrived. Rather than becoming agitated or protective, she appeared to draw strength from the obvious goodwill and compassion surrounding her and her cub. It was as if she understood that she was no longer alone in her struggle. She had found allies in the most unlikely of places, and those allies had proven themselves worthy of her trust. Dr. Marshall knew that decisions would soon need to be made about what to do next, but for now, he was content to simply witness the miracle unfolding before him. The cub was growing stronger by the hour, and its mother was finally able to rest, knowing that her baby was safe. The emergency room had become a sanctuary where the laws of nature had been temporarily suspended in favor of something far more powerful, the universal language of love and compassion. As he watched the bear gently nuzzle her recovering cub, Doctor, Marshall realized that this night had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had always known that medicine was about healing, but he had never truly grasped the deeper truth that healing was about connection, the profound bond that exists between all living creatures when they choose to care for one another rather than fear each other. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, casting everything in a golden light that seemed almost magical. The mother bear and her cub were bathed in that warm glow, and for a moment it was easy to believe that miracles were not only possible but inevitable, when love was strong enough to overcome every obstacle in its path. The night shift was ending, but Marshall knew that the story beginning in that emergency room was far from over. Something had been set in motion that would ripple outward far beyond the walls of Mercy General Hospital. The boundaries between human and animal, between fear and love, between impossible and inevitable, had been forever changed by one mother's desperate act of faith and the community of healers who had chosen to answer her call. as he prepared to hand over care to the day shift doctor. Marshall took one last look at the extraordinary scene before him. The mother bear was resting peacefully beside her cub, both of them surrounded by the quiet bustle of a hospital coming to life. It was a sight that defied every rule of nature and medicine, yet it felt more right and natural than anything he had ever witnessed in his career. The cub stirred slightly and made a small sound that brought its mother's head up immediately, alert and attentive to its needs. Even in her exhaustion, her focus remained completely on her baby's well-being. It was a demonstration of maternal love so pure and selfless that it left everyone who witnessed it forever changed. Dr. Marshall smiled as he realized that this was just the beginning. The mother bear had brought more than just her sick cub to their emergency room that night. She had brought a gift that would transform everyone she touched, the reminder that love knows no boundaries, that compassion is the most powerful force in the universe, and that sometimes the most profound healing happens not just in bodies, but in hearts and souls that dare to remain open to the impossible. The story that had begun with terror and confusion was evolving into something beautiful and transformative. As the morning light grew stronger and the hospital awakened to a new day, it was clear that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The mother bear had not just saved her cub's life, she had reminded an entire community of healers why they had chosen to dedicate their lives to caring for others in the first place. In the growing warmth of the morning sun, surrounded by the gentle sounds of healing and hope, the mother bear and her cub rested peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were safe, loved, and no longer alone in their struggle for survival. They had found something precious in that sterile emergency room. They had found family in the most unexpected of places, and that family would never let them face their challenges alone again. The second chapter of this remarkable story was about to begin, but the foundation had been laid in those first crucial hours when fear gave way to compassion, when the impossible became inevitable, and when a mother's love proved strong enough to bridge any divide. The real miracle wasn't just that the cub had survived. It was that in saving one small life, an entire community had rediscovered the power of love to transform even the most unlikely circumstances into something beautiful and sacred. As Dr. Marshall finally prepared to leave for the day, he knew that he would carry this experience with him forever. He had witnessed something that would change not just how he practiced medicine, but how he lived his life. The mother bear had taught him that healing is about more than treating symptoms or curing diseases. It's about recognizing the sacred connection that exists between all living beings and honoring that connection with compassion, courage, and unconditional love. The emergency room had returned to its normal rhythm, but the energy remained forever changed. Staff members moved with a gentleness and purpose that seemed to radiate outward from the corner where the mother bear kept her vigil over her recovering cub. Patients and families spoke in softer voices, as if they understood they were in the presence of something holy. The artificial boundaries that usually separated people in a medical setting had dissolved, replaced by a sense of shared humanity that transcended every difference. The mother bear had accomplished something remarkable in those first few hours. She had not just saved her cub's life, she had reminded everyone present of the power of love to overcome fear, the strength that comes from community, and the miracles that become possible when we choose to see beyond our differences to the common bonds that unite all living creatures. The story was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for something beautiful and transformative that would touch countless lives in ways that were only beginning to unfold. The news of what had happened during the night shift spread through Mercy General Hospital like ripples across a still pond, each telling adding new layers of wonder and disbelief to an already extraordinary tale. Dr. Ethan Marshall had barely made it to the parking lot when his phone began buzzing with calls from colleagues who had heard fragments of the story and needed confirmation that it was real. By the time he reached his car, he realized that returning home for rest was no longer an option. Something this profound demanded his continued presence, regardless of his exhaustion. When he returned to the emergency room an hour later with coffee and a fresh perspective, he found that the scene had evolved in ways that both surprised and moved him. The day shift had arrived to find not chaos or disruption, but an atmosphere of gentle reverence that seemed to transform everyone who entered the space. Dr. Sarah Chen was still there, having refused to leave her unusual patient, and she greeted him with eyes that sparkled with tears of wonder. "Ethan, you need to see what's been happening," she said, gesturing toward the corner where the mother bear maintained her vigil. "It's like she's become a magnet for healing. Every patient who comes in here seems to be affected by her presence. I've never seen anything like it." The truth of her words became evident as doctor. Marshall observed the subtle changes that had taken place during his brief absence. The usual tension and anxiety that characterized most emergency room visits had been replaced by something softer and more peaceful. Patients waited more patiently. Families spoke in gentler tones, and staff members moved with a purposefulness that seemed infused with deeper meaning. The mother bear herself appeared more relaxed than she had during the initial crisis hours. Her massive form was still alert and protective, but there was a quality of trust in her posture that suggested she had fully accepted that she and her cub were safe in this place. She had positioned herself so that she could watch both her baby and the flow of activity around them, but her earlier tension had given way to something that could only be described as peaceful vigilance. The cub's improvement was remarkable to witness. What had been a limp, barely breathing creature just hours before was now showing signs of the curiosity and playfulness natural to young animals. It was still weak and needed continued medical support, but its eyes were brighter and its movements more coordinated. Most importantly, it was responding to its mother's presence with obvious recognition and comfort. Dr. Marshall was checking the cub's vital signs when he noticed something that made him pause in amazement. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, was sitting in a wheelchair nearby with her mother. The child had been brought in for treatment of a severe asthma attack, but she seemed completely fascinated by the bear family. Instead of the fear that might have been expected, her face showed nothing but wonder and compassion. "Mommy," the little girl whispered, "the baby bear looks like I felt when I couldn't breathe. But look how much better it's getting. Do you think that means I'm going to get better too?" The mother's response was immediate and emotional. Tears filled her eyes as she realized that witnessing the cub's recovery was giving her daughter hope for her own healing. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "If the baby bear can get better, then you can too. The doctors here are very good at helping everyone feel better." The mother bear seemed to sense the child's presence and turned her massive head to look directly at the little girl. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the two mothers, one human, one bear, made eye contact across the species divide. In that shared gaze was a recognition that transcended words or rational understanding. Both were mothers watching their children fight for health and strength, and both had found themselves in this place of healing, surrounded by people dedicated to making everything better. The little girl was not frightened by the bear's attention. Instead, she smiled and raised her small hand in a tentative wave. The mother bear's response was extraordinary. She made a soft huffing sound that seemed almost like a greeting, and her expression gentled in a way that was unmistakably maternal. It was as if she recognized a kindred spirit in this small human who was also fighting to breathe freely again. Dr. Marshall found himself witnessing interactions like this throughout the morning as word continued to spread and more people found reasons to visit the emergency room. Each encounter seemed to deepen the sense that something magical was happening in this most unlikely of places. The mother bear was not just a patient or even a curiosity. She was becoming a catalyst for healing that went far beyond the physical. An elderly man who had been waiting for test results struck up a conversation with Dr. Chen about the remarkable scene unfolding before them. "I've been coming to hospitals for 70 years, he said, his voice filled with wonder, "and I've never seen anything that gave me as much hope as watching that mother care for her baby. It reminds me that love is the most powerful medicine there is." The profound truth of his words seemed to resonate throughout the room. Staff members who had been going through the motions of their daily routines found themselves reconnecting with the deeper purpose that had originally drawn them to healthcare. The mother bear's desperate act of love had stripped away all the bureaucracy and protocol that sometimes obscured the fundamental mission of healing, leaving only the pure essence of what it meant to care for another living being. As the morning progressed, Dr. Marshall began to notice that the mother bear was paying attention to more than just her own cub. Her intelligent eyes tracked the movement of other patients and their families, and she seemed particularly drawn to situations involving children or obvious distress. When a toddler began crying during a minor procedure, the bear made soft vocalizations that seemed intended to provide comfort. When an anxious father paced while waiting for news about his injured son, she watched him with an expression of such understanding that it brought tears to the eyes of everyone who witnessed it. The hospital administration had initially been concerned about liability and safety issues, but as the morning wore on, it became clear that the mother bear's presence was having a profoundly positive effect on everyone in the facility. Patient satisfaction scores were reaching unprecedented levels, staff morale was soaring, and the usual complaints and tensions that characterized busy hospital environments had virtually disappeared. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the chief of staff, arrived around noon to assess the situation personally. She had prepared herself for chaos and disruption, but what she found instead was an atmosphere of healing and hope that surpassed anything she had experienced in her 25 years of hospital administration. The mother bear looked up at her arrival, and Dr. Martinez felt herself being evaluated by eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "This is remarkable," she whispered to Dr. Marshall. "I came here prepared to order the removal of a dangerous wild animal. But what I'm seeing is something that defies every assumption I had. She's not just tolerating our presence, she's actively contributing to the healing environment." The truth of this observation became even more apparent as they watched the interactions continuing around them. A teenage boy who had been brought in after a skateboarding accident was initially resistant to treatment and hostile toward the staff. But when he noticed the mother bear gently grooming her cub, his entire demeanor changed. He began asking questions about the bears, and eventually allowed the medical team to treat his injuries without further resistance. "It's like she's teaching everyone here about patience and trust," Dr. Martinez observed. "Patients are more cooperative, families are more understanding, and staff members are working with a level of compassion and focus that I've rarely seen. Whatever this is, it's transforming our entire facility." The transformation was not limited to the humans present. As the cub continued to recover, it began showing signs of the playfulness and curiosity that characterized healthy young animals. It would reach out with tiny paws toward the medical equipment, fascinated by the beeping monitors and flashing lights. Its mother watched these displays of returning vitality with obvious relief and joy, her massive frame seeming to relax more with each sign of her baby's improvement. Dr. Marshall found himself spending far more time in the emergency room than his schedule required, drawn back repeatedly by the magnetic pull of this extraordinary situation. Each time he checked on his unusual patients, he discovered new layers of complexity and beauty in their interactions with the human world around them. The mother bear had somehow managed to bridge the gap between wild nature and human civilization in a way that honored both without compromising either. The afternoon brought new challenges and new miracles. A family arrived with their elderly grandmother, who was suffering from advanced dementia and had become increasingly agitated and confused. The usual medications and techniques for calming her had proven ineffective, and her distress was causing significant concern for everyone involved. But when the wheelchair-bound woman was brought into the emergency room and caught sight of the mother bear, something extraordinary happened. Her agitation immediately subsided, replaced by a look of wonder and recognition that seemed to cut through the fog of her condition. She began speaking in a language that her family didn't recognize at first, the universal language of maternal love and understanding. "Beautiful Mama," she whispered, reaching out toward the bear with hands that had forgotten how to perform most daily tasks but remembered how to express compassion. "Taking such good care of your baby. Such a good mama." The mother bear seemed to sense the elderly woman's vulnerability and confusion. She moved closer to the wheelchair, slowly and carefully, until she was near enough for the woman to gently touch her fur. The contact seemed to ground the elderly patient in a way that no medication had been able to achieve. Her breathing became calmer, her expression more peaceful, and for the first time in months her family saw glimpses of the loving, nurturing woman she had been before the disease began stealing her memories. "This is impossible," her daughter whispered through tears. "She hasn't been this calm or coherent in months. It's like the bear is reaching some part of her that we thought was lost forever." Dr. Marshall watched this interaction with a growing sense that he was witnessing something that would fundamentally change his understanding of healing and medicine. The mother bear was demonstrating that connection and compassion could sometimes accomplish what traditional treatments could not. She was proving that healing was about more than just fixing what was broken. It was about recognizing and honoring the sacred bonds that connect all living beings. As the day progressed, the emergency room began to take on the atmosphere of a pilgrimage site. People who had no medical reason to be there found excuses to visit, drawn by stories of the miraculous healing taking place in the most unlikely of circumstances. But rather than creating chaos or disruption, each new visitor seemed to add to the sense of reverence and wonder that had transformed the space. A group of medical students arrived for their regular rotation and found themselves witnessing lessons that no textbook could have prepared them for. They watched as the mother bear demonstrated the importance of patient advocacy, never leaving her cub's side and ensuring that its needs were always the top priority. They observed the power of presence and how simply being there for someone in distress could be more healing than any medication or procedure. One young student, Connor Adams, was particularly moved by what he witnessed. "I came here to learn about emergency medicine," he told Dr. Marshall, "but I'm learning about something much more important. I'm learning about what it really means to care for another living being. That bear is showing us what pure, unconditional love looks like, and how powerful that can be in the healing process." The mother bear seemed to sense the students' presence and their eagerness to learn. She began demonstrating behaviors that seemed almost deliberately educational, showing them how to be gentle yet firm, how to remain calm under pressure, and how to never lose sight of what truly mattered in the midst of all the technology and procedures that surrounded them. As evening approached, the cub's condition had improved dramatically. What had been a critically ill patient just 24 hours earlier was now alert, responsive, and showing signs of wanting to explore its surroundings. Its mother's relief was palpable, expressed through gentle nuzzling and soft vocalizations that conveyed more emotion than any human words could have captured. But the real miracle was not just the cub's physical recovery. It was the transformation that had taken place in everyone who had been touched by this extraordinary experience. Patients who had arrived focused solely on their own problems left with a renewed appreciation for the simple gift of being alive. Families who had been consumed by worry and fear discovered reserves of hope and strength they hadn't known they possessed. Medical professionals who had become jaded by the routine demands of their work remembered why they had chosen to dedicate their lives to healing others. Dr. Marshall found himself thinking about the ripple effects that would extend far beyond the walls of Mercy General Hospital. Every person who had witnessed this miracle would carry the story with them, sharing it with friends and family, who would then share it with others. The mother bear's act of desperate love was creating waves of compassion and understanding that would touch countless lives in ways that might never be fully measured or understood. As the second day of this remarkable vigil drew to a close, Dr. Marshall realized that he was no longer the same person who had been drinking his third cup of coffee just 48 hours earlier. The mother bear had taught him lessons about medicine, about healing, and about life itself that would influence every decision he made for the rest of his career. She had shown him that the most powerful healing often happened not through advanced technology or sophisticated procedures, but through the simple act of one being caring deeply for another. The emergency room had become a sanctuary where the artificial boundaries between species, between fear and love, between impossible and inevitable, had been dissolved by the transformative power of maternal devotion. The mother bear had not just saved her cub's life, she had reminded an entire community of healers of the sacred nature of their calling and the profound privilege of being trusted with another's well-being. As night fell once again over Mercy General Hospital, the mother bear settled down beside her recovering cub for what would be their second night in this place of healing. But they were no longer strangers in a foreign environment. They had become part of a family that transcended every conventional boundary, united by the universal language of love and the shared commitment to protecting and nurturing life in all its forms. The story that had begun with terror and confusion had evolved into something beautiful and transformative. As the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, it was clear that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The mother bear had brought more than just her sick cub to their emergency room. She had brought a gift that would continue to transform lives long after she and her baby returned to their forest home. The third day dawned with a sense of anticipation that seemed to permeate every corner of Mercy General Hospital. Word of the remarkable events unfolding in the emergency room had spread far beyond the medical facility, reaching into the surrounding community and beyond. Local news stations had picked up fragments of the story, though hospital administration had been careful to limit media access to protect both the Bear family and the patients who continued to be profoundly affected by their presence. Dr. Ethan Marshall arrived that morning to find that the overnight shift had witnessed something extraordinary. The mother bear, who had maintained her vigilant watch for 3 straight days, had finally allowed herself to sleep deeply for the first time since arriving. She had positioned herself so that her massive body formed a protective barrier around her cub, but her breathing had taken on the deep, rhythmic pattern of true rest, rather than the light dozing that had characterized her previous attempts at sleep. Nurse Jessica Brooks met him at the entrance with eyes that sparkled with tears of joy. "Ethan, you have to see this," she whispered, leading him toward the corner that had become the heart of their transformed emergency room. Around 3 in the morning, she finally let herself truly rest. But that's not the most amazing part. Look what happened while she slept. What Dr. Marshall saw took his breath away. During the night, patients and their families had quietly created something beautiful around the sleeping bear family. Flowers from the hospital gift shop had been arranged in gentle circles, creating a natural border that provided privacy while allowing clear sight lines for medical monitoring. Soft blankets had been draped over nearby chairs, and someone had even brought in a small lamp that cast warm, gentle light over the area. But the most touching addition was a collection of handwritten notes and drawings that had been carefully placed where the mother bear would see them when she awakened. Children had drawn pictures of bear families. Elderly patients had written messages of gratitude and encouragement, and medical staff had left notes expressing their honor at being part of this extraordinary experience. It happened spontaneously, Jessica explained, her voice thick with emotion. No one organized it or suggested it. People just started bringing things, creating something beautiful for her. It's like the whole community has adopted them as family. The cub had also made remarkable progress during the night. Its breathing was now strong and regular, its color had returned to normal, and it was showing increasing interest in its surroundings. Most importantly, it had begun nursing again, a sign that its appetite and strength were returning to normal levels. The sight of this most natural and essential bonding activity taking place in the midst of a modern medical facility was both surreal and deeply moving. As the morning progressed, Doctor, Marshall began to notice something that would prove to be even more transformative than anything they had witnessed so far. The mother bear's presence was beginning to break down barriers that had existed in the hospital for years. Patients from different backgrounds, ages, and circumstances were finding common ground in their shared amazement at what they were witnessing. An elderly veteran who had been struggling with depression since losing his leg in combat found himself sitting next to a young mother whose toddler was being treated for a minor injury. Under normal circumstances, these two individuals might never have spoken to each other. But as they watched the Bear family together, they began sharing their own stories of love, loss, and the fierce protective instincts that drive all parents to extraordinary lengths for their children. "I fought in 3 wars," the veteran said quietly, "but I never saw courage like what that mother showed when she brought her baby here. She had no way of knowing if we would help or hurt them, but she took that risk because love gave her no choice." The young mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "When my daughter was born, premature, I would have done anything to save her. I understand exactly what drove that bear to our door. Love makes us all capable of impossible things." These conversations were happening throughout the hospital as the mother bear's story continued to spread. She had become a catalyst for connection, helping people recognize the universal experiences that bound them together despite their surface differences. Her presence was creating space for healing that went far beyond the physical, touching hearts and souls that had been wounded by life's inevitable challenges. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been documenting the cub's medical progress, was also observing the psychological and social effects of the Bear family's presence. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of pediatric medicine," she told Dr. Marshall during their morning consultation. "The healing that's happening here isn't just about one sick cub. It's about an entire community rediscovering what it means to care for each other." The truth of her observation became even more apparent as the day progressed. Hospital departments that rarely interacted were finding reasons to collaborate and support each other. The cafeteria staff had begun preparing special meals for the families who were spending extended time in the emergency room, refusing to accept payment and insisting that caring for their community was reward enough. Maintenance workers were taking extra care to ensure that the area around the Bear family remained clean and peaceful, understanding that they were contributing to something sacred. Perhaps, most remarkably, the usual tensions between different shifts and departments had virtually disappeared. The night shift was staying late to help with the increased visitor flow, the day shift was arriving early to ensure continuity of care, and everyone was working together with a harmony that hospital administrators had never thought possible. The mother bear seemed to sense these changes in the human environment around her. As she became more comfortable with the routine of the hospital, she began displaying behaviors that suggested she understood her role in this transformation. When tensions arose between patients or families, she would make soft vocalizations that seemed to have a calming effect on everyone present. When children were frightened by medical procedures, she would position herself where they could see her, providing a comforting presence that helped them feel braver. One particularly moving incident occurred when a teenage girl was brought in after a suicide attempt. The young woman was resistant to treatment and hostile toward everyone trying to help her, consumed by pain and despair that seemed to make connection impossible. But when she noticed the mother bear gently caring for her cub, something shifted in her expression. "Why does she care so much?" "The girl," asked Dr. Marshall, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would she risk everything for someone else?" Dr. Marshall followed her gaze to where the mother bear was carefully grooming her cub, her massive paws gentle enough to handle the most delicate tasks. "Because that's what love does," he said simply. "It makes us willing to face any danger, overcome any obstacle, to protect the ones we care about. And love isn't limited to just our own species. That bear is showing us that every life has value, that every being deserves to be cared for and protected." The girl was quiet for a long time, watching the tender interactions between mother and cub. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a note of wonder that hadn't been there before. "If a wild animal can love that much, maybe there's hope for me too. Maybe I'm worth saving after all." It was a breakthrough that would have taken months of traditional therapy to achieve, accomplished in a few moments of witnessing pure, unconditional love in action. The mother bear had somehow managed to reach through the girl's despair and plant a seed of hope that would grow into a renewed commitment to healing and life. Stories like this were multiplying throughout the hospital as the Bear family's influence continued to expand. A bitter custody dispute between divorced parents was resolved when both parties realized that their child's well-being should take precedence over their own anger and hurt. An elderly man who had been refusing treatment for his cancer changed his mind after watching the cub fight for life with such determination. A young doctor who had been considering leaving medicine remembered why she had chosen this profession in the first place. The transformation was not limited to dramatic moments of revelation. Smaller, quieter changes were happening constantly as people found themselves responding to each other with greater patience, kindness, and understanding. The artificial barriers that usually separated patients, families, and medical staff were dissolving, replaced by a sense of shared humanity that made everyone feel more connected and supported. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the chief of staff, had been monitoring these developments with growing amazement. "I've been in healthcare administration for over 2 decades," she told the gathered department heads during their daily meeting, "and I've never seen anything that has had such a profound, positive impact on our entire facility. Patient satisfaction scores are off the charts, staff morale is higher than it's ever been, and we're seeing levels of cooperation and compassion that I didn't think were possible in a modern hospital setting." The Bear family's influence was also extending beyond the walls of Mercy General. News of their story was spreading through social media and word of mouth, inspiring acts of kindness and compassion in communities far from the hospital. People were sharing their own stories of maternal love and sacrifice, creating a ripple effect of positivity that seemed to grow stronger with each telling. Local schools began incorporating the story into their curricula, using it to teach children about empathy, courage, and the importance of helping others in need. Environmental groups found new inspiration for their conservation efforts, recognizing that the mother bear's trust in humans represented a bridge between species that could lead to better understanding and protection of wildlife. Religious communities of all denominations saw in the story a powerful example of unconditional love and the sacred nature of the bond between parent and child. As the fourth day began, it became clear that the cub was well enough to survive without constant medical monitoring. Its vital signs had stabilized, its appetite had returned to normal, and it was displaying the playful curiosity that characterized healthy young animals. The medical crisis that had brought them to the hospital had been successfully resolved, but the emotional and spiritual transformation they had catalyzed was far from complete. The mother bear seemed to sense that their time in the hospital was drawing to a close. She began displaying behaviors that suggested she was preparing for departure, while also expressing gratitude for the care they had received. She would approach different staff members and patients, making soft vocalizations that seemed unmistakably like thank you messages. Her intelligence and emotional sophistication continued to amaze everyone who interacted with her. Dr. Marshall found himself facing a dilemma that he had never encountered in his medical career. From a purely clinical standpoint, his patients were ready for discharge. The cub was healthy and strong, and both mother and baby would be better served by returning to their natural habitat. But the thought of their departure filled him with a sadness that surprised him with its intensity. "I know they need to go back to the wild," he confided to Jessica during a quiet moment. "That's where they belong, and keeping them here any longer wouldn't be fair to them. But I can't help feeling like we're losing something precious. They've changed all of us in ways that we're only beginning to understand." Jessica nodded, her own eyes misting with unshed tears. "I've been thinking the same thing. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the gift they've given us isn't meant to stay here in the hospital. Maybe we're supposed to carry it out into the world, to let it change how we treat each other and how we see our connection to all living things." Her words resonated with a truth that Dr. Marshall felt in his bones. The mother bear and her cub had not come to the hospital to stay. They had come to plant seeds of transformation that would grow and spread long after their departure. Their legacy would not be found in their continued presence, but in the changed hearts and minds of everyone they had touched. The decision about when and how to facilitate their return to the wild was complicated by the unprecedented nature of the situation. Wildlife experts who had been consulted were unanimous in their recommendation that the bears should be returned to their natural habitat as soon as possible the cub was medically cleared. But they also acknowledged that this case was unique in the annals of human-wildlife interaction and deserved special consideration. Dr. Amanda Foster, a wildlife biologist who had been following the story, arrived at the hospital to assess the situation personally. She had expected to find a stressed and potentially dangerous wild animal being kept in inappropriate conditions. Instead, she discovered something that challenged every assumption she had about the relationship between humans and wildlife. "This is extraordinary," she told Dr. Marshall after observing the bear family for several hours. "I've studied animal behavior for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The level of trust and communication between these bears and the human community is unprecedented. It's like they've formed a genuine interspecies bond that goes far beyond simple tolerance or coexistence." The mother bear seemed to recognize Dr. Foster as someone with expertise in her species and natural habitat. She approached the wildlife biologist with obvious interest, allowing herself to be examined and assessed in ways that would normally be impossible without sedation. It was clear that she understood the purpose of the evaluation and was cooperating fully with the process. "She knows we're trying to help her make the best decision for her and her cub," Dr. Foster observed with wonder. Look at how she's positioning herself to give me access while still maintaining protective proximity to her baby. This level of cognitive sophistication is remarkable in any species, but especially in an animal that should instinctively fear human contact. The examination revealed that both mother and cub were in excellent health and fully capable of surviving in the wild. The cub's illness had been completely resolved, and its mother had regained the weight and strength she had lost during the crisis. From a biological standpoint, there was no reason to delay their return to their natural habitat, but the emotional and social dimensions of their departure were far more complex. The bear family had become integral to the healing environment of the hospital, and their absence would undoubtedly be felt by everyone who had been touched by their presence. Patients who had drawn strength from watching their recovery were concerned about how they would cope without that inspiration. Staff members who had found renewed purpose in their work worried about returning to the routine challenges of healthcare without the transformative influence of their unusual patients. The solution, when it came, was as remarkable as everything else about this extraordinary story. The mother bear herself seemed to indicate when the time was right for departure. On the 5th morning, she began displaying behaviors that clearly communicated her readiness to leave. She spent time with each of the staff members who had cared for her cub, approaching them individually with vocalizations and gestures that seemed unmistakably like farewell messages. Most remarkably, she seemed to understand that her departure would be difficult for the humans who had become attached to her family. She spent extra time with patients who seemed particularly distressed by the prospect of her leaving, offering comfort and reassurance in ways that transcended the barriers between species. Her emotional intelligence and empathy were as remarkable as her trust and courage had been throughout their stay. The actual departure was planned for early morning, when the hospital would be at its quietest and the transition would be least disruptive. Dr. Foster had arranged for the bear family to be transported to a protected wilderness area where they would be safe from human interference while still being monitored to ensure their successful reintegration into the wild. As the time for departure approached, something beautiful began to happen throughout the hospital. Patients, families, and staff members who had been touched by the bear family's presence began gathering to express their gratitude and bid farewell. It was not a chaotic or overwhelming crowd, but rather a gentle assembly of people who understood that they were witnessing the end of something sacred and transformative. The mother bear moved through the gathered crowd with dignity and grace, acknowledging each person who had played a role in her cub's recovery and their family's healing. She seemed to understand that these humans had opened their hearts to her in ways that went far beyond professional obligation, and her responses conveyed a depth of gratitude that brought tears to even the most stoic observers. Children who had been patients during the bear's stay were particularly moved by the farewell process. They had formed special bonds with the cub, seeing in its recovery a reflection of their own healing journeys. The mother bear seemed to recognize this connection and spent extra time with each child, offering gentle nuzzles and soft vocalizations that seemed to convey encouragement and hope for their continued recovery. Dr. Marshall found himself struggling with emotions he hadn't expected. As a medical professional, he had learned to maintain appropriate boundaries with patients, but the bear family had touched something deeper than professional detachment. They had reminded him of the sacred nature of healing and the profound privilege of being trusted with another's well-being. "Thank you," he whispered to the mother bear as she approached him for their final goodbye. "Thank you for trusting us with your most precious gift. Thank you for showing us what love really looks like, and for reminding us why we chose to dedicate our lives to healing others." The mother bear's response was immediate and deeply moving. She gently pressed her massive head against his chest in what could only be described as an embrace, making soft vocalizations that conveyed more emotion than any words could have captured. In that moment, Doctor. Marshall felt a connection that transcended every boundary between species, a recognition of the shared commitment to protecting and nurturing life in all its forms. As the bear family was gently guided toward the transport vehicle that would take them back to their natural home, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the sadness and sense of loss that everyone had expected, the gathered crowd began to feel something else entirely. There was a sense of completion, of having been part of something larger than themselves, of having witnessed and participated in a miracle that would continue to influence their lives long after the bears had returned to the wild. The mother bear paused at the hospital entrance and turned back toward the people who had saved her cub's life and welcomed her family into their community. Her final gesture was one that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. She rose up on her hind legs and seemed to bow toward the assembled crowd, a gesture of gratitude and farewell that was unmistakably deliberate and deeply respectful. The cub, now healthy and strong, seemed to understand the significance of the moment as well. It made small vocalizations toward the crowd and reached out with tiny paws as if trying to touch each person one last time. The bond that had been formed between this bear family and the human community was not being broken by their departure. It was being transformed into something that could travel with them wherever they went. As the transport vehicle disappeared into the morning mist, carrying the bear family back to their wilderness home, the people gathered at Mercy General Hospital began to understand that they had not lost something precious. They had gained something that would stay with them forever, the knowledge that love knows no boundaries, that healing is about connection as much as medicine, and that the most profound transformations often come from the most unexpected sources. The emergency room felt different without the bear family's physical presence, but the changes they had catalyzed were permanent and far-reaching. Staff members continued to work with the renewed sense of purpose and compassion they had discovered during those remarkable 5 days. Patients and families found that they approached their own healing journeys with greater hope and determination, inspired by the memory of a small cub's fight for life and its mother's unwavering devotion. In the days and weeks that followed, stories began to emerge of how the bear family's influence continued to ripple outward through the community. Medical students who had witnessed their stay went on to practice with a deeper understanding of the emotional dimensions of healing. Patients who had been touched by their presence became advocates for wildlife conservation and environmental protection. Families who had found strength in watching their recovery became more supportive of each other and more open to helping others in their own times of need. The mother bear and her cub had accomplished something that seemed impossible when they first appeared in that emergency room doorway. They had reminded an entire community of healers and patients that healing is fundamentally about love, connection, and the willingness to care for others, even when they are different from ourselves. They had shown that the boundaries between species, between fear and trust, between impossible and inevitable, could be dissolved by the transformative power of unconditional love. Dr. Marshall kept a photograph on his desk of the mother bear, gently nuzzling her recovering cub, surrounded by the medical equipment that had helped save its life. Whenever he faced a particularly challenging case or felt overwhelmed by the demands of his profession, he would look at that image and remember the lessons he had learned during those 5 extraordinary days. He would remember that healing was about more than fixing what was broken. It was about recognizing and honoring the sacred bonds that connect all living beings. The story of the mother bear who carried her sick baby to the emergency room became legend in the medical community and beyond. It was told and retold, each telling adding new layers of meaning and inspiration. But for those who had actually witnessed it, who had been present during those transformative days, it was more than just a story. It was a reminder that miracles are possible when love is strong enough to overcome fear, when compassion is more powerful than prejudice, and when the willingness to help others transcends every boundary that might otherwise divide us. The Bear family had returned to their forest home, but their legacy lived on in the changed hearts and minds of everyone they had touched. They had planted seeds of transformation that would continue to grow and spread, creating ripples of kindness and understanding that would touch countless lives in ways that might never be fully measured or understood. They had proven that sometimes the most profound healing happens not in spite of our differences, but because of our willingness to see beyond those differences to the common bonds that unite all living creatures in the shared experience of love, loss, hope, and the fierce determination to protect those we hold most dear. The emergency room at Mercy General Hospital continued to serve its community with the same dedication and professionalism it had always shown, but something fundamental had changed. The artificial barriers that had once separated patients, families, and medical staff had been permanently lowered, replaced by a deeper understanding of the sacred nature of the healing relationship. The Mother Bear had taught them that caring for others was not just a job or a profession. It was a calling that connected them to something larger and more meaningful than themselves. As the seasons changed and new patients came and went, the story of the Bear family continued to inspire and transform. New staff members were told the tale during their orientation, not as entertainment but as an essential lesson about the true nature of healing. Patients facing their own health challenges found strength in remembering that if a wild animal could trust humans enough to seek help for her baby, then perhaps they too could trust in the healing power of love and community. The Mother Bear and her cub had given Mercy General Hospital more than just a remarkable story to tell. They had given everyone there a deeper understanding of what it meant to be part of a healing community, a recognition that the most powerful medicine was often the simplest, the willingness to care for another living being with compassion, courage, and unconditional love. Their brief stay had created a legacy that would continue to touch lives and transform hearts for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most profound teachers come in the most unexpected forms, and that the greatest miracles happen when we have the courage to open our hearts to the impossible.